What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Y'all know what it is. Here to hopefully give you some information that might be of use to you. Obviously, from the perspective of, a black man, right? In the interest of uplifting black men and boys, right? Today, got an interesting piece where we have a young woman who's talking about a concept that I've spoken a lot about over the last year. Which is proxy violence. And it is a difficult one to, kind of follow empirically, because at the end of the day, if it comes down to actually catching people do it, you got to kind of catch the person who initiated it. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Anyway, so without further ado, looks like we got cut off here. There we go. Have to try and let the young woman speak for herself. And by the way, I got to say, I got to dig the shout out to the old school in her attire, especially as it pertains to that bucket hat. But anyway, let's get to it and listen to what she has to say.
Cousins for every... Stop calling your brothers and your cousins for every little argument, because you women sit on social media, you sit around, everybody killing everybody, but you never tell the truth that there's been 1,000 shootings and homicides trickle back down to you running your fucking mouth, or you calling somebody and exaggerating because you feel disrespected. Stop calling people. You get an argument with somebody on the block, that's it, leave it there. You call your brother, now these niggas going through it the whole summer, and then somebody's child die about it. That's your fault.
All right. Now, that's just a short snippet. That's all I actually saw of it. But I wanted to shout her out in terms of what she had to say. And the reason I wanted to do that is much of the time when I see, people going back and forth in the comment sections or just a live debate, and it could be on any subject, really. But when it comes to black men, one of the things that constantly comes up is this whole issue of how many black men kill each other. And there's no doubt that is an incredibly important conversation to have. And black men need to hold each other accountable as for how we deal with one another. Violence and argumentation need not be the primary way that black men deal with each other. And it's not to say it's the primary way, but it's significant enough to be a problem. I do not sidestep any of that. I fully believe that we need to actually be able to improve the way we dialogue. And that includes here on YouTube. Brothers go back and forth with each other over the slightest of misunderstandings, or without even finding out if there is a misunderstanding. And we also understand that part of the reason for that is because it's lucrative, right? It's a lucrative thing to go back and forth with one another as it pertains to, the clicks and views and all that good stuff. So conflict, whether it be in poor black neighborhoods or whether it be in these YouTube streets, seems to be a constant. But here's another piece to the puzzle that does not get talked about, because when we talk about this violence, we talk about it solely in terms of black men. And I argue these are actually communal issues. These are community issues. Black men are definitely pulling triggers on one another in significant numbers. However, as a communal issue, it's not just involving black males. Yes, we talk about black females, especially little girls, if they are on the receiving end of a bullet, and we should, right? Because it's sad and it's tragic. But the other side of the dynamic we don't talk about in regard to female influence is the role of proxy violence. And this is what she's talking about here. She's talking about the ways where women and even girls can contribute to this by invoking male protection for a variety of things. Sometimes serious things, sometimes trivial things. And yet they can lead to lethal outcomes, and nobody talks about it. And one of the reasons we don't is because when you get one man who kills another, right? Especially obviously if he's caught, right? If he's caught, he goes to jail, the other man is dead, or if he survives, they're going through it and then there's revenge. There's all kinds of scenarios. At the end of the day, we're still talking about the one who pulled the trigger and the one who received the bullet. We're not talking about those who played a role in instigating violence in the community. They don't get talked about at all, almost to the degree where many of us are ready and prepared, and some are doing so right at this moment, to argue that it's not relevant, but it is. Last year, there was a case of a young lady and her mother, if I'm not mistaken. I reported on it, but I didn't look at the article again before today's show, so it just popped off the head. So forgive me if I've gotten some of the details wrong. but you all might remember this. It was a lady, a mother and a daughter, if I'm not mistaken, who were in a store, and the security guard, who was a brother, asked them to go out and get their masks and come back in. And that blew up. There was all kinds of disrespect and argumentation against the security guard. And then one of the women called the men of the family, husband, brother. They came down, shot and killed the security guard. There was another incident in a McDonald's drive-thru with an employee and a person at the drive-thru, and the woman at the drive-thru was upset. She felt disrespected. She was arguing back and forth, and then she called her boyfriend. He came and shot and killed the gentleman at the McDonald's drive-thru. I can't remember if he survived. I want to say he died. But these were all cases I reported on during my shows last year, particularly in the summer. And there are many more examples of such, right? Protection in one way, shape, or form. But as the woman in this piece talks about that protection can take many different forms, and sometimes it can be purely trivial. Sometimes it can be a conflict over a love triangle. It can be all kinds of different things, and yet we don't talk about it. But why am I saying this? Is it just to incriminate women and girls? No, it's to take a conversation that has solely been in one space and actually expand it to a communal discussion, because it affects the community, it happens in the community, and it should be discussed as a communal affair. Last year, they did a series on New Edition, right? They did a live action movie about the lives of the members of New Edition. And they did a separate one for Bobby Brown. Y'all knew it was going to be a separate one because that's just how Bobby rolls, right? But in it, there was actually a scene where you got to see how Bobby Brown's mother sold drugs. This is a middle-aged woman in the hood, right? But the narrative that we've always had was that this was strictly a young black man's game. And maybe there were a couple older guys who, became kingpins in the game. But for the most part, aside from a couple of female drug dealers of note, it was just really a young man's game. So when I watched the movie, I was kind of blown away. Not as much because I cared about the intricacies of Bobby Brown's life. But what blew me away is it had never dawned on me to think about the way some middle-aged women could actually play into the drug game. Now, we know that a lot of this was basically out of survival. And that doesn't just limit itself to the young men involved. That also includes the middle-aged women involved. But the point I'm getting at is it never crossed my mind. Similar thing. A couple of years ago, there was a debate that took place both in my classroom and on my social media page about pimping. And the idea, of course, that black men started pimping and they oppressed women with pimping. But when I actually brought up celebrities, multiple celebrities who grew up in these environments and whose mothers and grandmothers were madams and were in control. And if anything, especially if you talk about someone like Richard Pryor, his grandmother actually trained his fathers and his uncles to serve as pimps. A whole different level of discussion. And then people got quiet, because we had not actually been introduced to pimping as something that actually impacts anything beyond just black men. Now, again, I'm not interested in incriminating for the sake of incriminating. What I am saying is I think we need to reposition many of the discussions we have about black men, especially when you're talking about murder, especially when you're talking about pimping, theft, so on and so forth. We need to recontextualize these as communal issues, because all of them are a response to poverty. All of them are a response to the environment, but those in the environment are not strictly men. Because even if you look at what men are doing with the resources they gain illegally, how much of it involves women and girls? How much of it has to do with fathers putting food on the tables with their daughters, or mothers or grandmothers who are involved in these industries on different levels for their own purposes? And yet we only have one-dimensional conversations. So what I'm trying to do here is broaden the conversation, because the conversation clearly impacts people beyond just the surface level of blaming black men. We got to be more honest. And if you've actually grown up in these situations, you've seen a lot more than what the mainstream talks about. But if you're limiting the conversation to just these derelict, violent, monstrous black men, you're doing a disservice to the truth. And the truth is far more nuanced and far more complicated. Because in a communal setting where people are desperate and struggling, especially during different economic periods, and yes, we are in one now. We are actually in a very serious one right now. it definitely affects who participates and does what. But here's the trick. If in the popular consciousness, we don't think about the myriad ways these things play out, then black men are the only ones that remain the monsters to be held accountable. And this becomes something justified by the state. I mean, think about it. Even if you have court hearings, who actually serve as the jury? Everyday people. Everyday people that walk in with a predominant perception that black males are monsters. I've seen this happen on juries. And who suffers? We have to be able to open up this discussion, and if nowhere else, at least amongst ourselves. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen communally. All right? Y'all take it easy. Hope to hear from you in the comment section. Peace.